everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Ruby, and I'm also one of your chef instructors in the courses. Today specifically is my open office hours, and I'm very pleased that you've stopped in to ask a few questions or just to listen to the conversation. Now, as we get started, I'd like to mention a couple of things, and these are, I think, the common housekeeping items. Number one, if you would like to participate in the conversation a little more directly, you're welcome to do so by entering a question or even a comment in the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. It says "Add question here." And then the second thing is, as you see the questions that will be populating the screen on the right side, if you come across one that you would like me to answer sooner than later, you can push that up in priority by clicking on the heart-shaped icon that you'll see, with each individual question. Okay? Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump on in. And I'll start from the top here with Shauna's question. Hello, Shauna. So Shauna says, what suggestions or insight can you provide for using what I have learned to create a part-time business? Not catering, but teaching others how to cook plant-based. So a part-time business as an educator. And part of this, of course, is going to depend upon what's going on in your neck of the woods, in your locality, and ways to start. Would include, for example, if you can find some sort of a local venue. For some people, it's a church. Or other, place of worship that has some open space, often during the week, or, on those, on some days of the week when the property is available to you. And then, sometimes folks might have a clubhouse in the neighborhood, or sometimes a grocery store might have a meeting place in the back somewhere. I see that in a couple of places here. In my town. And those places are often available for rent, and they often have a regular schedule of events that take place. And this is where you might start out by talking and presenting. It could be recipes, it could be very simple, assembly and finishing of dishes to get people, thinking about adding more plants to their diet. I will sometimes get out to do cooking demonstrations around town. I'm in the Portland, Oregon area, and places that I have affiliated with in the past include Bob's Red Mill. They have what they call the Bob's Red Mill cooking school on their campus, and a very nice setting. And so I've used that a number of times. Also, consider participating in seasonal agricultural events like harvest festivals. And locally here, there's an apple and pear harvest festival. And, they will take chef instructors and other folks locally here that want to provide some sort of a cooking demonstration. There are also cultural festivals that you might inquire about. For example, an Oktoberfest takes place here locally, and I've been part of that in one way or another in the past. There are certainly many other possible cultural populations or communities that you might reach out to and ask if they would appreciate some live entertainment with an educational twist to it. And in this way, you get your name out there and start practicing And then you'll see what kind of opportunities open up. Whether that is maybe some commercial kitchen space that's available by the hour that you can rent in order to have a pop-up sort of an event, around plant-based cooking and education. Um, and then, also, keep in mind that in order to cast a wide net, think about the I'll say the words that you choose, right, as you appeal to a broad audience. And so for example, um, while I certainly embrace plant-based, cooking and eating, and that bigger picture, right, in terms of effects on the environment and um, farm workers, and there's often a social justice piece in there, and so on and so forth. But rarely do I try to push a 100% plant-based approach necessarily, especially if I'm trying to convert people, so to speak, right, to this way of eating. And the goal for me is to encourage people to simply eat more plants. And for some people, that does mean 100% all in sort of plant-based goodness. For other people, it just means trying it out once a week. And then twice a week, and then eliminating something, and then allow your audience members to sort of find their own entry points, because there are so many, right? Whether it's one's personal health or public health or animal rights, um, farm worker health, and so many other possible entry points. So, maybe mention those things, provide suggestions as to where a person might enter this broader discourse around plant-based food and the bigger picture. Okay, and so those are a couple of ideas that come to mind, and hope you'll give those a try. But again, a lot of this comes down to investigating what's available in your own locality. Okay, think about secondary and post-secondary educational institutes as well as possible venues for you to, spread the gospel, so to speak. All right, thank you. All right, next up, we've got chef instructor Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today. And it looks like Vanessa's focus is on healthy cuisine. And she says, I also recently finished a certification in nutritional coaching. My question is, what suggestions do you have for incorporating my love of both? Um, so this is somewhat similar to the previous question, but it sounds like as a chef instructor, you might already have a venue, possibly, right, for teaching, and that would be a great place to start. Ask your administration, your lead chef instructor, whoever that entry point might be, about the idea of doing some extracurricular courses, ones where students might stay after class or come in whenever that might be, when the kitchens are available. I realize that could be a concern as well in some schools. But see if you might start, with these smaller opportunities to introduce again this idea of the goodness of plants and how one might add plants first of all to your own diet, and then also to offer more plants on one's menu, right? Especially if you're a chef instructor. I'm guessing that most of your students have some professional aspirations, and most certainly in the professional realm of education and teaching and cooking, uh, there is a demand and there's a need, right? So there's a push and a pull in the marketplace for more plant-based offerings. And, it's a challenge. I've been down a similar path. And, I understand that, many students will come, especially to a conventional culinary program, with meat on their mind. And, there's a lot of uh, excitement around butchery. There's a lot of, gender stereotypes around meat cookery and meat consumption. And it can be difficult sometimes to sort of get past that barrier. But think about it as a speed bump rather than a barrier, and slowly reach out through your examples, right? Your demonstrations of really tasty food that's colorful, right? It looks good, and the "it's good for you" message can be secondary, quite frankly. I mean, I think that after all, um, the typical consumer is going to go to your restaurant, right, or the restaurant of your students because they heard that it tasted good. And then they're going to come back because they experienced the delicious food. And whether it was good for them or not is often a secondary thought. But again, I realize that many consumers are also motivated primarily by the healthfulness of food. Um, I don't want to close the door to any of those audience members. So, um, think about that okay. I'll share an experience of mine. This was a handful of years ago, when I was teaching at the Art Institute of Portland. And, I was lucky enough, I think, to have a department director that was open to the idea of offering elective courses for our students. And I had the opportunity to teach Ayurvedic cooking courses. And that was a course that I designed. I had 100% academic freedom, and again, lucky enough that the academic director was open to putting that on the schedule, offering it for credits that would go toward the toward graduation for the students. And so, if you're in a setting like that, approach your director and see what sort of opportunities might be available for you. Okay. But otherwise, as I mentioned with the earlier question, you might also look out in the community for opportunities to combine, your two sort of passion plays or loves, so to speak, right? It's the education piece and it's the nutrition piece, and you're bound to find some traction either in the community or hopefully on campus. All right, thank you. All right, next up, question is from Tara. Actually, you know what? Before I go on to Tara's question, let me just mention that in the lineup here, I think it's toward the bottom of the list of questions in the queue, you'll see a link to an archived live event. So for those of you that are interested in starting a business of some sort, and it could be education focused, or it could be something very different like catering. It could be the development of a product. But there's a link, and it's popped up to the top of the list right now. So take a look at that. And, in that discussion, I share just a number of different things to consider, and especially around, starting a small business that will feed people, a cafe, or it could be catering. But you can probably glean some information for other types of food-related businesses. Okay, I will also say that for everybody here, that when it comes to a business, I'm a big fan of creating a business plan. And when I think about a business plan, there's certainly a lot of resources out there, a lot of books, websites that you can look at. But I often think about the group of volunteers at an organization called SCORE, SCORE.org. And SCORE is it's a division of the U.S. Small Business Administration, and there you'll find folks that come from so many different industries, including the food business in some form or another. And you can talk to these people about your business idea, and then also get some pointers on developing a business plan. And it's the business plan that will help you address some of the key questions that are really on the road to your I'll say success ultimately, but these are just basic questions around audience selection and marketing and so on and so forth that are so important to a successful business ultimately. Okay, and part of the idea here is to give your business idea a good shake to see if it's going to be viable as you currently envision it. And if not, then you can shift direction and make some changes and understand better what it is that you're up against. Okay, so give that a try. Thank you. All right, back to Tara. Hello. Tara writes, in your opinion, what is the best way to make tofu crispy in texture? Okay. There are a couple of methods that are pretty common, and they're going to include oil, right? Some sort of fat. Cooking with a dry heat method, first of all, but with the addition of oil in particular, really hastens the extraction of moisture on the surface of tofu. And that's going to give you the best chance for a crispy or relatively crispy surface. And, you want to start off with, I would say, a relatively firm style of tofu, one that's going to have a relatively lower moisture content. So there's extra firm and there's firm styles of tofu. So look for those. And you can deep fry tofu. And then you can also, saute, with adequate fat to create that layer between the tofu itself and that hot surface of the pan to avoid sticking, to avoid burning, while drawing out moisture and crisping up the surface. Okay, but for me, adequate fat should be a part of that. In terms of the sticking, tofu being high in protein tends to stick pretty easily to cookware. So this is where you might consider a non-stick variety of cookware. But do give it some experimentation and find that right balance of fat and temperature and cooking surface to achieve your desired results. All right, thank you. All right, Louis. Good to see you. I appreciate your recent questions as well, through the support@ruby.com alias. All right, your question today is, what are some great common vegan dessert recipe sites or books that you can refer to sharpen your sword? We're not talking a knife here. We're going big. We're talking about a sword. So that you are effective in making vegan desserts. Aha. So, a couple come to mind, and the first person is going to be my colleague here at Ruby, Fran Costigan, and Fran, has been it in the vegan dessert world for a really long time, and so first of all, check out her website, which is francostigan.com. And you'll also see a reference to a couple of her books. Okay. And then, when the time is right for you, Louis, you might consider enrolling in her course, through Ruby. And it's the Essential Vegan Desserts course. And in that course, Fran, who does all the grading, so you'll have a lot of contact with Fran and have a chance to ask a lot of your good questions. She covers a lot of different grounds, in the in the baking and broader dessert world, but all of it is going to be plant-based, and that's a fun course. So do check that out. Okay, and then another one I might add to that list, this short list here, is the Minimalist Baker. The Minimalist, it's a kind of a tongue twister, but minimalistbaker.com. And on that site, you'll find some, I think, pretty well vetted, recipes and some commentary. Okay, I hope that gets you on your way. Thanks, Louis. All right, next up, a question about lecithin. A recipe on the Ruby website for cashew cheesecake calls for 3 tablespoons lecithin. Could protein powder be substituted for this? If so, would 3 tablespoons still be required? What is lecithin and why would it be desired in cooking? So, let's start from the tail end, okay, of your questions here, Arlene. And I'll first say that, lecithin is a substance that we typically use as an emulsifier. And an emulsifier means that it's going to help water and fat, right, or water and often oil stay together, right? Normally, those two substances want to repel each other. And but there are some times when we want to get those to stay together. And so we need some sort of a go-between. And so something that we call an emulsifier that will bring those two things together. And so that's where lecithin comes into play. And a classic place, right, where we hear about lecithin is with Hollandaise sauce. And so Hollandaise sauce is one where we have egg yolks and other water-based substances like vinegar that come together with clarified butter. And it's the lecithin that's naturally occurring in the egg yolk that helps bring those two together to result in that classic sauce. Okay. Now, in the plant-based world, because we don't use egg yolk as that common source of lecithin, we will use isolated varieties of it. And soy lecithin is most common, in liquid or dry powder form. It's also available in granules. And then also, if a person wants to avoid soy products for whatever reason, sunflower lecithin in both liquid and dry form are also commonly used. And so, in this recipe for the cashew cheesecake, it calls for a lot of lime juice, which is a water-based substance, and then also a fair amount of coconut oil. So that's your fat. And we want to get those to mix very smoothly and in a stable way. And so that's where the lecithin comes into play. I'm going to suggest that you stick with lecithin, in one form or another, liquid or powder, or even granules, rather than straying and, using a protein. Okay, you're going to get, I think, initially anyway, the best results doing that. My experience with this recipe is with the powdered version of lecithin, although you should be able to use the same amount in liquid form to get that stability in bringing the fat and water components together. Okay, I hope you'll give that a try. And otherwise, it's a lovely cheesecake recipe. And, with a little bit of repetition, you're going to find that balance between sweetness and the acidity from the lime juice, as well as the flavor that comes in from the zest. And, I think you'll find that a balance that you and your audience, your friends and family will enjoy. Thank you. All right. And thank you, Richard, for posting the link to the cashew cheesecake recipe. All right. Next up from SR. Do you have recommendations on using rice cookers or instant pots when trying to avoid arsenic in rice, as the recommendation goes to use a lot of water and also to change water during the cooking. If you are going to use a pressure cooker or the pressure setting on one of these, electric pressure cookers, such as an Instant Pot branded product, then it becomes very difficult, right? Or really impractical to try to change the water midstream. Otherwise, and this probably holds true for rice cookers, and maybe, rice cookers less so, right? In other words, non-pressurized rice cookers. If you want to use what we call the pasta cooking method, which means to use lots of water and then cook the rice in that abundant water until it reaches your desired degree of doneness, and then you strain it, right? So the excess water goes away. So you could do that in a non-pressurized setting, right? And for a rice cooker, that would mean pulling the insert right out of the electric base and then draining the rice at that point, very much like what you would do if you're cooking rice in a pan. Okay. But otherwise, other parts of the sort of pulling arsenic, I'll just say pulling the arsenic out of the rice approach would be to, soak the rice, let's say a couple of times prior to cooking and then proceeding with the cooking. But again, depending on your comfort level, right, your concern with the whatever levels of possible arsenic might be present, then the pasta method is going to be your way to cook the rice. And it should be done in a non-pressurized vessel. All right, thank you. Okay, next question regarding no oil vinaigrette. Okay, so we've got a Ruby recipe which uses apricot paste and a liquid sweetener. Is all that sugar really better than using a little olive oil, which would also make ADEK vitamins? So those are going to be your fat-soluble vitamins of the salad greens more bioavailable. So the question is what we have here is a vinaigrette to which we're trying to add or otherwise create some body, right? Some viscosity. And so if, let's say by definition, right, you're trying to create a no oil vinaigrette, then adding olive oil would not be a good idea. On the other hand, if you don't mind using oil, right, in this case, olive oil, then no problem. I think that's the way to go to move forward. Is it better? That's going to be up to you. Okay, if you're open to any sort of a vinaigrette, then you get to choose whether you want to use apricot paste to add body, and how you want to deal with a liquid sweetener, which depending on what you want in the end product, may not be necessary. All right, it's going to be up to you to test that recipe. Now, another approach to a no oil vinaigrette is to use, for example, apple juice and to thicken it with a slurry. So a slurry is going to be a combination of starch powder, like cornstarch or some other common starch in the kitchen, and water. And then you're going to incorporate that into some apple juice, bring that up to a simmer or a boil to thicken it. And then you want to cool a sample of that to see if it's at your desired viscosity. And what you're aiming to do with this approach is to thicken the apple juice so that it mimics the viscosity of oil. Okay, once that juice is cooled, and then you can combine it with a vinegar of your choice, add additional aromatics, and then you've got a nice vinaigrette. Okay. Apple juice is a suggestion. It has been commonly used in this manner because it's fairly neutral. It does add some sweetness, but you can certainly use other fruit juices or other juices, period. And it's going to be up to you to just experiment and think about what you're going to pair that vinaigrette with. Okay, enjoy. Thank you. All right, Mary Jo, hello. I have made a batch of tamarind paste for a particular recipe, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas for other uses of the paste. So let's think about what tamarind paste lends to a dish, or in other words, its function in a recipe. A tamarind paste commonly is used as a souring agent. So, much as we might use lemon juice or lime juice or something else that's sour, tamarind is used as a souring agent. And just like other souring agents, it's going to be accompanied by a certain set of flavors. And in this case, there's a fruity, sort of an earthy flavor profile. At least that's the way I think about it. And so think about, any preparations that will, first of all, benefit from a sourness, an element of sour taste, which is most cooking, right? It could be a soup or a stew or a rice dish, for example. And also think about a kind of an overall flavor profile where you wouldn't mind that added fruitiness. And I think it's very versatile, at least in the type of cooking that I do. In fact, just this past weekend, I had a biryani, which is an Indian rice preparation that had tamarind added as the acidulant or as the souring agent. And I thought that was a wonderful way to use the pulpy, whole tamarind product. So anyway, think about some of those outlets. It could be a tomato sauce that might be accompanied, then with a pasta, right? Or as I mentioned, soups and stews or rice dishes. And so that opens up a whole world of possibilities. And so give it a try and see what suits your palate. Thank you. All right. Next up, we got a question from Ted, who writes, what are some best practices for living small and prepping food? My wife and I have a tiny home on wheels and are living in 200 square feet. 100 of that is kitchen. Excellent. I love it. 50% kitchen. Just my kind of home. We did this as part of our commitment to reduce our carbon footprint. All right. Kudos to you, Ted, and your wife for taking on the challenge of living small. I appreciate that. I have certainly stayed in homes and visited homes of the tiny house sort of size, and have worked with people in kitchens that were really, really small. Probably, in some cases, as I'm thinking about this, even smaller perhaps than your approximately 100 square foot kitchen. And I'll tell you, one thing that I like about small kitchens is their potential efficiency, because you don't have to take many steps in any direction in order to get what you need to get and go to where you want to go. Best practices, I think, are going to center on storage. And I use this word broadly. for me, when I'm cooking and prepping, I think about storage as places to stage food that are somewhere midstream, right, in the cooking process. And in professional kitchens, we often have what's called a speed rack or multiple speed racks, which are basically racks with these little brackets that accommodate sheet pans. And a standard speed rack will accommodate a full sheet pan, which is about something like 26 by 18 inches, pretty good size. But you can also accommodate half sheet pans, turned sideways. And not that I'm encouraging you to install a speed rack in your tiny home, but kind of using that approach as inspiration to create something that works for your setting. Whether that's a racking system that will just accommodate a half sheet pan or maybe even a quarter sheet pan, depending on how much food you need to cook. And otherwise, having flat surfaces around so that you can just set things down on become very important in my experience. And this is true of some of the smaller commercial kitchens, certainly bigger than 100 square feet, but nonetheless relatively small commercial kitchens where I've been part of a team that has fed upwards of 1,000 people at a time. And in those times, that sort of organization, right, places to put sheet pans, which I find to be probably the most efficient way to store food generally, okay, has come into play. And so I'm trying to transfer, right, that experience, those systems on a smaller scale to your setting. And so think about a racking system that will accommodate standardly available sheet pans. In your case, half sheet pans or maybe even quarter sheet pans. And then, or otherwise, flat surfaces. Okay. But I would imagine that you could have some fun, from an interior design perspective, in designing such a system that will bring a lot of satisfaction and joy to your cooking. And I'm very happy that you posed this question. It's very interesting and gets me thinking about some added efficiencies in my own kitchen here at home. Thank you. All right, next question. I've learned cooking from Ruby and from other classes. I may have modified the recipes in a certain way to suit my preferences or my taste. How do I give credit to the recipes, to recipe sources, or the original inspiration recipe in the right way while not taking away from my creativity? Okay, this is an interesting question. And, I'll first say that, there's more than one approach, of course. And I'll preface this by saying that at some point, whenever it's convenient for you, if you have a chance to pose this question to an attorney, somebody that specializes in intellectual property, you might have an interesting discussion. Okay, but otherwise, my approach, and I think a very common approach, is very simply to make a statement at the bottom of the recipe or wherever it's going to be accessible by your audience, and say something like the original recipe is courtesy of ... It could be something that simple. Another way to approach this scenario, again, it sort of depends on the details here, but, include a discussion of the recipe and how you came upon this recipe, your version of it. Maybe you did some traveling in a certain place, and you came across a favorite dish. You talked to people. You looked at some of the literature, and you tried out different variations, of this dish, and you made a couple of changes, and these are the changes that I made, and this is how I came to this version that I offer you, my readers. And so, include a discussion that can give credit to some of the people along the way that helped you and that brought you to this place of success. Okay, so those are a couple approaches, but also think about that idea of talking to somebody that deals with this sort of information from a legal perspective, because at some level, in some context, it could become a legal issue. Right? Thank you. All right. And the next question. Any advice on making potato doughs? So boiled mashed potato with eggs and flour and salt. Okay. They're very tricky. Too much flour is it's too hard and chewy. Not enough flour, and it breaks down during boiling. It's very hard to strike a balance in ingredients and technique. Okay. So what you've described in my mind is potato gnocchi, which is certainly one way of using a potato dough. Certainly, as you describe the base here, right? Potatoes, which could be boiled. They could also be baked. That's certainly a legitimate approach. Eggs act as a binder. The egg whites in particular are going to be important in this case. But I think about it. There are approaches that eliminate egg white, but do include egg yolk, which is added for flavor, and fat, which contributes to the texture and the mouthfeel, okay, of the finished product, as well as some color. And then flour. So here, use a flour that's got a good gluten content. So an AP flour at the low end is probably going to be fine. And you can even use a bread flour, which is going to give you 2 or 3 percentage points more, okay, in gluten, which will give you structure, okay, in the finished product. And then the all-important salt to bring just that little bit of interest on the palate. So, as we think about, when I think about a potato gnocchi, okay, I'm thinking about pushing the cooked potato through a ricer or using a grater in order to break it down into a small size that's also very even, okay, across the entire potato. So we don't want lumps because lumps are more difficult to stay together. But if you have smaller pieces, there's more surface area and more binding activity that will take place. Okay. When you get the flour, okay, as you mentioned, not too much flour. One place to start is approximately 25% flour by weight when compared to the potato. 20 to 25%, let's say, right in there, is often a good place to sort of play with that dough. And then the other part is, as you're incorporating the flour, we certainly want to knead it, but we want to knead it minimally, okay? Because the more we knead, the more the gluten is developed and the chewier the product is going to be, okay? Now, certainly the egg yolk with its relatively high fat content is going to help maintain we call it shortening. or tenderness, okay, in the finished product. But still, if there's too much kneading, you're going to develop a chewiness, right, as you're describing here. So keep that in mind. All right. And then otherwise, we want to add that to some gently boiling water, right? There's boiling water, but there can be water with a very robust boil or with a more gentle boil. Think about it at a more gentle boil so that there's not too much agitation in the pot. We want some movement, but not too much, so that the dumplings or the gnocchi, whatever it is that you're making, doesn't get bounced around and beat up too much. Now, on the other hand, we don't want the water to cool down too much because the starch in the flour will take too long to gelatinize or to absorb the liquid and reach that cooked state. And in that situation, if it sits in a water that's too cool, the water instead will soak in and allow those dumplings to fall apart. Okay, so yes, I agree. There's definitely a balance in there, but do keep that in mind. Okay, and then otherwise, what you're talking about here is recipe testing. So recipe testing, in my mind, requires note taking, and also requires some precision. Okay, with each step that you take. So measure with a scale your ingredients, take notes, and then also when you get to a point of success, okay, after some modification, of course, as you do recipe testing, uh, also note the percentage, okay, of the flour relative to the potato, okay, in this case. And then go from there. Okay, but keeping in mind that as you change ingredients, for example, type of potato, and also type of flour, and other variables such as the temperature of the water or the amount of kneading that you do, that all of these variables will affect the end product. Okay, and so the more testing you do in a focused sort of manner, including adequate note taking, the more or the deeper your understanding will develop, and you're going to be able to then navigate these changes much more freely. Okay, now I want to take a bit of a tangent here, and talk about this idea of percentages, okay, in the course of creating food, in particular baking. All right, so as we get deeper into baking, actually, let me take another tangent here and just mention that when it comes to potato gnocchi, also try baking them so you can roll them out into a kind of a thick sheet, and then adequate flour, right? And then I like to cut them out in little rounds, and then just place them on a baking sheet, and then brush them with oil so they don't dry out in the oven. And use oil of your choice, whether it's butter or olive oil or something else, and then bake them. And then just you do the testing to get to the desired timing on doneness. But that's going to give you sort of another approach, okay, to cooking these potato-based dumplings. All right, but anyway, back to baking for a moment here. A lot of you are aware that like bread recipes, many of them are written in weight measures, right? Units of measure, and ideally using the metric system, in my opinion. Okay, but the reason why, one reason why it's so nice to use weights is that it gives us a chance to start to investigate and understand recipes via what's called the baker's percentage system. Which means that our starting point in the case of bread, which is going to be flour, right, as our main ingredient, is referred to as 100%. And then all of the additional ingredients, salt and yeast and whatever, is going to be listed as as a relation to the flour, as a percentage of the weight of flour. And if you can get to the point where you understand this language of baking, then you're going to develop the understanding and the control over the formula. It's not a recipe at this point, but it's a formula. You'll have enough control over it to understand that if you want to change the texture in this direction or add a certain type of ingredient, that you can make adjustments to percentages and have confidence in the finished product. Okay, so a bit of a tangent here from dumplings, I realize, but it's all in the spirit of, I guess, giving a plug to understanding certain recipes by weight and by ratio and by percentage, so that again, you can control that recipe or that formula better, and therefore make changes to it with greater confidence. Okay, so keep all that in mind as you move down your path of better cooking. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Emina. Hello. Question is, do you have recommendations for plant-based whole food tiramisu without alcohol? Wow, this is a interesting request. I mean, offhand, I don't, but I'm a big fan of tiramisu and would love to find something that fits your requirements for my own enjoyment. Perhaps you can send me this question at support@ruby.com. Okay. And let's take it up there, because I don't have a quick response for you. All right. But it sounds delicious, whatever the results might be. All right. Thank you. Look forward to hearing from you. Next up from Victoria. I grow a lot of green leafy vegetables, and I'm having a hard time keeping up with this year's crop. Would vacuum sealing and freezing these leaves ruin them once I want to use them? Aha. So, when you say ruin, Victoria, I guess it depends on what you want to use them for. Once we freeze an item, I mean, in this case, fruits and vegetables, right? Water expands, right? When it's frozen, and it will rupture cell membranes, such that when we thaw it, it sort of collapses. The water escapes, and that's why we have soft food after it's been put through the freeze thaw cycle. Okay, now at that point, I mean, we're probably not going to make a fresh salad out of it, right? But you can certainly use that product in a soup or a stew, or chopped up or pureed in some sort of a format, in some sort of an application. And so I think there are many ways that you can use your leafy greens. But just understand that they're going to be sort of in a cooked state, chopped up or pureed, and they can, I think, be used quite nicely. And how lucky you are to have a bumper crop of leafy greens, right? So I wish you all the best as you experiment, and otherwise just have fun incorporating your leafy greens into your diet. Thank you. All right, the next question says, I want to start hosting healthy eating seminars. What would you suggest how to start and where to start? Aha. So, this question is very much in line, I think, with the first two questions that I referenced in today's show. And, that is, look for places in your community that are going to be friendly to these sorts of gatherings. And, some grocery stores have spaces. It could be your church. maybe your neighborhood has a community, gathering place, um, or something else. I mean, it could be a meetup on a nice day at a local park, in order to get everybody outside. And certainly, if you make it a potluck, that is going to attract people. It certainly would attract me. I go to where the food is. But anyway, those are some quick ideas. Sort of a rewind and listen to the front end of today's talk once it's posted to the archives, and you can get into some other ideas possibly. Okay, but it's a great idea, and I wish you all the best in bringing people together around this very important topic, of eating better, and that can look like so many different things for different people. All right, thank you. All right, and Marcy, hello. I am enrolled in the Pro Plant course and run a farmer's market and a gluten-free micro bakery. I'm getting requests for catering, kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Done 2 events that went well, but any resources you could recommend? Yes, I've got one book that's sort of at my fingertips here, and this book is by a person named Denise Vivaldo, and it's called Parties, Do It for Less. And so, in this particular book, Denise talks about cooking on a large scale. And she comes from a professional catering background and has a lot of tips and some approaches on how you scale up or down the volume from, a dozen people to multiples of that. Okay, so this is a place to start. There's another book out there that's been around for a while, and I think it's called something like Cooking for 50. Something like that. And it's a book that has been used off and on in catering courses in professional culinary schools. And, it's a textbook of sorts. And you might give that a search and see what you come up with. But in addition to that, take a look at the earlier referenced archived live event that I did some time ago on business basics. Okay, and Richard, thank you. You got these books already listed here as references. Excellent. I appreciate that. Also, as you think about pricing and other details around your products, right? Your events, or however it is that you sell your services, your products. I recommend checking out the competition, and you're bound to see prices and product quality and portion sizes like all over the board. But it's going to give you an idea of just what's going on out there. And, also, if it's possible, I recommend going to work part-time for some successful, catering company in your area and learning some tricks of the trade, so to speak. The food business, as you're probably figuring out if you're, doing this in this professional manner already, there are a lot of idiosyncrasies associated with the food industry. And I always think it's a good idea to learn how to navigate those places on somebody else's dime, so to speak, so that you don't have to suffer the loss of money, trying to blaze a new trail. Okay, but if you can get in on somebody else's on their coattails once a week, or just very occasionally, on their events, you might even do it as a stage. What we call a stage is when you work for a restaurant for no pay. And what you're doing is you're learning, right? Which is priceless. And anyway, it just gives you a chance to learn systems and controls, which are very important to the restaurant business, um, and just other ways of problem solving. So give all that a try. And by all means, if you have any other questions that might come up, feel free to reach out at support@ruby.com, and we can continue the conversation. Okay. I let's see that. Yeah, indeed, that is the last question of the day. And I appreciate everybody's participation and attendance today. And until we meet again, give these new foods and ideas a try. Take notes along the way. If you have questions, reach out, and enjoy the cooking. All right, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye now.